Nobody has time for a poor old lady. Mocking laughter echoed through the bank. The young man clenched his fist, stepped out of line and positioned himself in front of her. 30 seconds later, decisive footsteps resonated. A four-star general in ceremonial uniform entered. What made an entire banking system bow down and apologize to a widow? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Evan Mitchell adjusted his worn baseball cap as he entered First National Bank on Thursday morning. At 29, the former serviceman carried himself with quiet confidence, shoulders straight, eyes alert, movements economical. 6 months after his honorable discharge, he was settling into civilian life as a plumber, finding satisfaction in fixing problems with his hands. Growing up as the son of a war widow had shaped Evan in ways he rarely discussed. His father, a Marine sergeant, had died in Afghanistan when Evan was just 7. He still remembered how his mother struggled afterward, not just financially but with the dismissive treatment she often received when dealing with bureaucracy. Those memories had instilled in Evan a protective instinct toward those who served and the families they sometimes left behind. His apartment rent was due tomorrow, and he preferred paying in person rather than trusting the mail. Joining the short line at the teller window, Evan noticed an elderly woman at the customer service desk. She appeared to be in her late 70s, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing a cardigan despite the warm spring weather. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed a document across the desk. "Ma'am, I've explained this 3 times already," the young bank representative said, her voice carrying an edge of impatience. "The system shows no error. The fee was correctly applied according to our policies. But this letter shows differently," the woman insisted, her voice soft but determined. "My husband's military pension shouldn't have these charges. It's protected under our computer, doesn't show any special status." The representative interrupted, barely glancing at the paper. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do." The woman's shoulders slumped slightly, but she remained standing, dignity intact. Evan recognized that posture, the same quiet resilience his mother had shown when facing countless similar dismissals. "Can I speak with a manager, please?" the elderly woman asked. A young man in line behind Evan made an exaggerated sigh. "Some people just don't understand how lines work," he muttered loudly. Others in the bank glanced over, then quickly looked away, embarrassed by the confrontation, but unwilling to involve themselves. The bank representative's expression hardened further. "The manager is unavailable, and as I've said, there's nothing to discuss. Perhaps you should come back another time when you have the correct documentation." "Come on, lady," the impatient young man called out. "Take your complaints somewhere else. Some of us have real jobs to get to." Evan felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. The same feeling he'd experienced watching his mother's tears after being dismissed by officials who couldn't be bothered to help. Before he could second-guess himself, he stepped out of line and walked to the customer service desk. With gentle respect, he placed a hand on the elderly woman's shoulder. The bank representative looked up, startled. "This woman deserves your respect and attention," Evan said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority he'd developed during his service. "I'm happy to wait while you properly address her concerns." The representative's expression shifted from annoyance to uncertainty. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. Please return to your place in line." Evan remained standing beside the elderly woman. "Actually, it does concern me and everyone else here. We all deserve to be treated with dignity." Eyes from around the bank focused on him, some admiring, others disapproving, most simply uncomfortable with the disruption of social norms. "Is there a problem here?" asked a security guard approaching slowly. Evan smiled slightly. "No problem at all. I'm just standing with this lady until her issue is properly addressed. When everyone turns away, only conscience remains. Stay with us to see what happens next." As the security guard hovered uncertainly nearby, the elderly woman turned to Evan with a grateful smile. "Thank you, young man, but you don't need to trouble yourself." Her voice carried the soft inflection of the South, but with a backbone of steel beneath the gentleness. "It's no trouble, ma'am," Evan replied, maintaining his position beside her. She extended a Rose Whitman, widow of Colonel Arthur Whitman, 1st Infantry Division. He died serving in Iraq 15 years ago. Evan shook her hand, noting her firm grip despite the age-spotted skin. "Evan Mitchell, former Army, 10th Mountain Division." Rose's eyes brightened with recognition. "My James trained some of your officers, I believe." She turned back to the bank representative, who was watching their exchange with thinly veiled impatience. "This document is from the Veterans Administration. It clearly states that these accounts are exempt from maintenance fees. The same letter came 3 months ago, and your manager corrected it then." Evan glanced at the paper. The letterhead was official, the language clear. He'd seen similar documents during his transition to civilian life. Mrs. Carter has the correct documentation right here, Evan noted. Could you please take another look? The young representative sighed dramatically. Our computer system is the final authority on account status, not some letter. If there's been a change, she needs to take it up with the VA, not us. By now, the confrontation had drawn the attention of everyone in the bank. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit stepped out of an office, frowning at the disruption. What's the holdup, Megan? He asked the representative. Before Megan could answer, a voice called from the line. This guy's playing hero for some old lady. Some of us have places to be. Evan recognized the speaker as the same impatient young man from earlier. Others in line nodded in agreement, checking watches and phones with exaggerated gestures of inconvenience. Sir, the suited man addressed Evan. I understand your concern, but we have procedures. Mrs. Carter can make an appointment to discuss this matter. Evan felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice even. With respect, sir, this isn't about procedure. It's about doing what's right for someone who sacrificed for this country. The man in the suit, likely a manager, narrowed his eyes. Are you suggesting we don't respect military families? Because I assure you, this bank has many veterans as customers. I'm suggesting, Evan replied carefully, that Mrs. Carter deserves more than being brushed aside. Rose reached into her purse and withdrew a small card, pressing it discreetly into Evan's palm. He glanced down, seeing military insignia, and the words Charlie Company, 1st Division, an elite, highly decorated unit. It's all right, dear, Rose whispered. I'm used to this dance by now. Something in her calm dignity struck Evan deeply. This wasn't just about a bank fee. It was about how society treated those who had given everything for their country. Once the uniforms were gone and the parades ended, the security guard stepped closer. Sir, if you're not conducting business, I'll have to ask you to leave. A woman in line called out. He's just pretending to be a hero. Probably wasn't even in the military. Another voice added, yeah, who appointed him the bank police? Evan felt a familiar isolation, the same disconnect he'd experienced since returning to civilian life, where people spoke of supporting troops, but often failed to understand what that truly meant. For a moment, he considered walking away. He had his own problems, his own bills to pay. Rose seemed to sense his hesitation. You've done enough, son. I can fight my own battles. But the stubborn part of Evan, the part that had gotten him through 18 months in Afghanistan, refused to yield. I'm not leaving, he said quietly to Rose, then turned to face the manager. I'm a customer of this bank. I have a right to be here, and I choose to stand with Mrs. Carter until her issue is properly addressed. The manager's face flushed. Then I'll have to ask you both to leave. We can't have disruptions affecting other customers. Calling the police would be quite a story, wouldn't it? Evan replied evenly. Bank ejects military widow over disputed fee. Is that really the publicity you want? The standoff continued, with the manager and Megan exchanging glances. Finally, Megan pushed Rose's papers aside. We'll need to research this matter further, Mrs. Carter. You should go home and wait for our call. Rose's shoulders slumped slightly, but she nodded with dignity. Very well. As she gathered her papers, she gave Evan's hand a gentle squeeze. Thank you for your kindness. It reminds me that not everyone has forgotten. Evan felt both angry and helpless, emotions he'd struggled with since his discharge. He had stood up, yes, but what had it accomplished? The system remained unmoved, protected by procedures and indifferent. As they turned to leave, Rose whispered, My James always said that one person standing for what's right is worth a regiment of those who stand for nothing. The security guard moved toward the door, clearly intending to escort them out. Evan walked beside Rose, his hand supportively at her elbow, aware of the stares following them. Some sympathetic, most merely curious about the unusual disruption to their day. If you've ever witnessed an innocent person being treated unfairly, type As they approached the bank's glass doors, Evan wrestled with conflicting impulses. Part of him wanted to escalate the confrontation, to demand justice for Rose in a more forceful way. Another part recognized the futility of fighting an entrenched system. After all, what could one former soldier accomplish against a corporate giant? Rose seemed to read his thoughts. You've done more than most would, she said softly. Standing beside someone, it means more than you know. The security guard reached to open the door, his face impassive, but his body language making it clear they were being escorted out, rather than politely assisted. I'm sorry I couldn't do more, Evan replied, genuine regret in his voice. Rose patted his arm. Sometimes just not being alone is enough. Before they could exit, the bank's double doors swung open from the outside. Evan instinctively stepped back, positioning himself slightly in front of Rose, a protective habit from his military days. A tall man in his early 60s entered, wearing the distinctive dress uniform of a U.S. Army general, complete with rows of ribbons and stars on his shoulders. Behind him followed 4 officers in formal military attire, creating an imposing presence that immediately commanded attention. The bank fell completely silent. The security guard froze, hands still on the door. Evan straightened instinctively, recognizing the authority before him. The general's eyes swept the room before settling on Rose and Evan. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice resonant with authority and warmth. "We've been looking for you." Rose's eyes widened in recognition. "General Mallory," she replied, a note of surprise in her voice. General Robert Mallory, commanding officer of the Regional Military Command, stepped forward and did something that caused everyone in the bank to stare in astonishment. He embraced Rose gently with the respect one might show to family. "Rose, I apologize for our delay. Traffic was worse than expected." Stepping back, he surveyed her with genuine concern. "Is everything all right here?" Before Rose could answer, the bank manager rushed forward, recognition and alarm battling on his face. "General Mallory, what an unexpected honor. I'm Charles Donnelly, branch manager. How can First National be of service today?" The general's expression cooled as he assessed the manager. "I'm here personally to escort Mrs. Rose Whitman to the memorial dedication ceremony, but it appears there might be an issue that needs addressing." Rose shook her head slightly. "Just the usual confusion about James's pension account, John. This young man was kind enough to stand with me." She gestured toward Evan. General Mallory turned his full attention to Evan, who stood straight but not at attention, one veteran acknowledging another. "And you are?" the general asked. "Evan Mitchell, sir, former specialist, 10th Mountain Division." The general extended his hand, which Evan shook firmly. "Thank you for looking after Mrs. Carter. She's very special to our military family." Turning back to the increasingly uncomfortable bank manager, General Mallory's voice took on an edge. "Perhaps you're unaware of who Rose Whitman is. Allow me to illuminate the situation." The entire bank, customers and employees alike, stood frozen as the general continued. "Rose Whitman isn't just any military widow. For 37 years, she worked alongside her husband at training facilities across this country. While Colonel Whitman trained soldiers in tactics, Rose counseled thousands of young recruits struggling with the transition to military life. She established support programs for military families that are still in use today." One of the officers behind the general stepped forward, handing him a folder. "When Colonel Whitman was killed, saving 3 of his men during an ambush in Fallujah, Rose didn't stop serving. She's volunteered over 15,000 hours at VA hospitals. The fee exemption she's trying to explain to you was personally authorized by the Secretary of Defense in recognition of her contributions." The manager's face had drained of color. Megan, the young representative, seemed to be trying to make herself invisible behind her desk. "Furthermore," the general continued, "the account in question holds funds from a special pension category established for families of Medal of Honor recipients, which Colonel Whitman was awarded posthumously." A collective gasp rippled through the bank. Even Evan felt a new wave of respect wash over him as he realized who he had been defending. General Mallory's voice remained steady but carried throughout the silent bank. "Mrs. Carter has never used her connections or her husband's status to demand special treatment, which makes it all the more disappointing to find her being dismissed when she simply asked for what she's legally entitled to." The manager was now visibly sweating. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding. General will rectify this immediately." "You'll do more than that," the general replied. "I'm personally requesting a full audit of how veterans' accounts are handled at this institution. One of my staff will remain here to begin that process today." He turned to Rose with gentler eyes. "The ceremony begins in an hour. Everyone's waiting to honor you and James." Rose smiled softly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." As they prepared to leave, General Mallory turned back to Evan. "Mr. Brooks, would you do us the honor of joining? The ceremony commemorates soldiers and the families who support them. From what I've seen, you understand that bond better than most." Evan stood momentarily speechless, then nodded his acceptance. As they walked toward the door, the general paused beside the young man who had been so vocal in his complaints earlier. Without directly addressing him, Mallory spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on distant battlefields, but in ordinary places like banks and offices and neighborhoods. And sometimes the greatest courage isn't charging into gunfire, but simply standing beside someone when everyone else walks away." Outside, a military vehicle waited at the curb. As Rose was assisted inside, she reached for Evan's hand, one last time. "Thank you for seeing me," she said simply. "So many people look right through the elderly, especially widows." "You saw me." Evan stood tall, emotion tightening his throat. "It was an honor, ma'am." General Mallory clasped Evan's shoulder firmly. "You know, son, we have a saying in the military. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand your ground. Today you proved the principle extends beyond the battlefield." As the procession prepared to depart,
Evan caught a glimpse of bank customers and staff watching through the windows, some with shame, others with newfound respect. Sometimes the general added quietly, "It takes just one person standing up to change an entire system. Remember that if you believe that one perfectly timed action can change fate type." Yes, the events at First National Bank that Thursday morning catalyzed changes that rippled outward in ways Evan could never have anticipated. By the following week, the bank had issued a formal written apology to Rose Whitman. More significantly, they announced a new training program for all staff on properly handling veterans' accounts and treating military families with appropriate respect. Megan, the customer service representative, personally reached out to Evan, admitting that the encounter had forced her to examine her own biases. "I never realized how dismissive I'd become," she confessed. "Now I see people, not just transactions." For Evan, the military ceremony had opened unexpected doors. General Mallory, impressed by the young veteran's instinctive stand for principle, offered him a position as a civilian advisor to the military's community outreach program. The role allowed Evan to serve as a bridge between veterans and the communities they returned to after service. "You understand both worlds," the general explained, "and you have the courage to speak up when necessary." Though his plumbing skills weren't directly applicable, Evan found his new role deeply fulfilling. He helped design programs that assisted veterans transitioning to civilian life, focusing particularly on the practical challenges his fellow servicemen and women faced, from navigating bureaucracy to finding meaningful employment. At military headquarters, a photograph appeared in the main corridor, Evan standing beside Rose Whitman at the memorial dedication. Beneath it, a caption read, "Sometimes standing still means standing tall." The image became an unofficial symbol for the command's renewed commitment to supporting military families. Long after active service ended, Rose herself became a regular visitor to Evan's office, often bringing homemade cookies for the staff. Their friendship deepened, with Rose filling something of the maternal void left when Evan's own mother passed away 2 years earlier. Through Rose, Evan connected with dozens of veterans from earlier eras, creating an intergenerational support network that benefited everyone involved. Charles Donnelly, the bank manager who had so quickly changed his attitude when confronted with General Mallory's authority, found himself unexpectedly transformed by the experience. 6 months after the incident, he contacted Evan to volunteer his financial expertise for veterans struggling with money management. "That day changed how I see my responsibility to this community," Wilson admitted during their first meeting. "I realized I'd been hiding behind policies instead of helping people." Perhaps the most profound change occurred within the bank itself. Megan, once dismissive of difficult elderly customers, shared her perspective during a staff training session. "I used to think my job was processing transactions efficiently. Now I understand that sometimes silence is the wrong response. I learned that day that standing up doesn't always mean making a scene. Sometimes it just means refusing to look away when someone needs support." Her words resonated with her colleagues, many of whom had remained silent during Rose's ordeal. Gradually, the culture at First National shifted toward one of genuine service rather than mere transaction processing. For Evan, the experience crystallized a truth he'd sensed, but never fully articulated. That courage manifested differently in civilian life than on the battlefield, but was no less important. "In combat, we stand together by necessity," he explained to a group of newly discharged veterans. "In civilian life, we must choose to stand together. That choice to not walk away when it would be easier to mind your own business. That's what preserves the values we fought to protect." A simple plaque appeared on Evan's desk, a gift from Rose on the anniversary of their meeting. It bore only 3 lines. "Sometimes one person standing for what's right is worth 1,000 standing for nothing at all. Thank you for standing with me." As I've reflected on Evan and Rose's story over the past weeks, I keep returning to one question. How many times in our lives do we choose to stand up, even when everyone else turns away? It's easy to talk about courage in dramatic terms, running into burning buildings or performing heroic rescues. But perhaps the most common form of courage is also the quiet, the decision to stand beside someone who is being dismissed, overlooked, or treated unfairly. Evan Mitchell didn't make a grand speech in that bank. He didn't threaten or intimidate. He simply refused to accept the status quo, when that status quo meant an elderly woman being brushed aside. His action reminds us that courage often begins with simply staying put when everyone else walks away. I wonder how many Rose Whitmans exist in our everyday lives. People whose stories and contributions remain invisible until someone takes the time to truly see them. The elderly veteran at the grocery store struggling to reach an item on a high shelf. The immigrant family confused by paperwork that native English speakers take for granted. The disabled person faced with yet another inaccessible entry. In these moments, we all face the same choice Evan faced: to involve ourselves in a situation that doesn't directly affect us, or to mind our own business and walk away. The world tells us to stay in our lane, to avoid other people's problems. We're conditioned to believe that heroes wear uniforms or possess special abilities. Evan's story reminds us that sometimes heroism is as simple as saying, "I'll stand with you until this is resolved." Who has stood beside you during your most vulnerable moment? Who refused to leave when you faced dismissal or disrespect? Perhaps it was a teacher who believed in you when others had written you off. A colleague who spoke up when you were talked over in meetings. A friend who accompanied you to difficult appointments. A stranger who intervened when you faced harassment. Take a moment today to remember them. Better yet, reach out and thank them for their quiet courage. And perhaps more importantly, ask yourself, when was the last time you were that person for someone else? When did you last risk discomfort to ensure someone else was treated with dignity? There are heroes without medals or uniforms walking among us every day. They don't make headlines or receive public accolades. They simply choose to do what's right when the world chooses silence. They understand that moral courage often costs more than physical courage, because it must be sustained day after day in small, unglamorous ways. The next time you witness someone being dismissed, overlooked, or treated unjustly, remember Evan Mitchell. Remember that sometimes the most powerful position isn't speaking loudly or making demands. It's simply standing beside someone and refusing to leave until they're heard. Evan never set out to make headlines. He only wanted to make sure someone was seen, really seen. And as he stood in that bank beside a woman most would have overlooked, something unspoken shifted. Sometimes the smallest stand becomes the cornerstone of a wider change. Sometimes what begins in silence resounds through 1,000 lives. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Evan's story isn't the dramatic intervention by General Mallory, but the initial choice Evan made to step out of line and stand with Rose when there was no audience, no recognition, and no guarantee of success. In that quiet moment of decision, he revealed his true character. As Rose told Evan, "My James always said that one person standing for what's right is worth a regiment of those who stand for nothing." Today, let's be that one person. Let's be the one who sees, who stands, who refuses to walk away. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where stories like these will never be forgotten. Type "remember" if you believe that quiet courage is the true strength. We told their story, you gave it meaning. Thank you.